Chapter 18. The Dragon's Choice. The first hunter fired and the bullet hit my chest and bounced off like it had struck stone. I felt it. Felt the impact and the heat and the way my scales absorbed the force and distributed it across my body. But it didn't hurt. Not the way it should have. The hunter fired again and this time I moved. Not consciously, not with any kind of plan. My body just reacted and I was airborne before I realized I'd launched myself. Was rising above the clearing with my wings beating against the cold night air. The wind was different up here. Sharper. Cleaner. It smelled like pine and snow and something ancient that had been sleeping in these mountains for longer than I could comprehend. Below me the hunters were scrambling and their voices were sharp with panic and confusion. Someone was shouting orders but the words were lost in the sound of equipment being repositioned and vehicles starting and the general chaos of people realizing their plan had failed. I circled once and tried to figure out what I was supposed to do next. Tried to remember that these were people, that they had families and lives and reasons for being here even if those reasons were based on fear and lies. But they'd come here to kill me, had brought equipment designed to burn out my abilities and leave me dying slowly and painfully, had been willing to kill everyone I cared about to make sure I didn't survive. The heat in my chest flared and I felt my jaw open and something building in my throat that tasted like smoke and copper. Elijah. Atticus's voice cut through the chaos and I looked down to see him standing near the tree line with his rifle raised. Not pointing at me. Pointing at the hunters who were trying to regroup near their vehicles. "We need to move," he shouted. "They're calling for reinforcements." I dropped lower and the hunters scattered. Some of them ran for the vehicles and some of them raised their weapons and some of them just stood there frozen like they couldn't process what they were seeing. A net launcher fired and I twisted in midair and felt the weighted edges brush past my wing. The net hit the ground and tangled in the underbrush and the hunter who'd fired it was already reloading. I landed between him and his vehicle and the impact shook the ground. My claws dug into the earth and my wings spread wide and I looked at him and tried to decide what kind of person I wanted to be. He dropped the launcher and ran. Smart choice. Behind me I heard gunfire and shouting and the sound of something heavy hitting metal. I turned and saw Lysandra and Torin engaging a group of hunters near the standing stones. Lysandra was moving with brutal efficiency and Torin was providing cover fire, and between them they were holding their ground. But there were too many hunters. At least 30 that I could see and probably more in the forest. They had body armor and automatic weapons and years of training and they were coordinating their movements in a way that suggested they'd done this before. A vehicle engine roared and I looked up to see an armored truck accelerating toward the center of the clearing, toward where Naira was crouched behind one of the standing stones with her radio. I moved without thinking, launched myself forward and felt my body respond with a speed and power that should have been impossible. I hit the truck broadside and the metal crumpled and the vehicle flipped and rolled and came to rest on its side with smoke pouring from the engine. The driver kicked out the windshield and crawled free and I let him go. Watched him stumble toward the tree line and disappear into the darkness. "Elijah, you're 6. I spun and saw 3 hunters with what looked like a modified rocket launcher. They were aiming it at me and their expressions were grim and determined and I realized this was the kind of weapon that could actually hurt me. I started to move but something hit me from the side and knocked me off balance. Not a bullet. Something bigger. Something that felt like concentrated force wrapped in electricity. I hit the ground hard and my vision went white and every nerve in my body screamed. The pain was different than anything I'd felt before. Not physical exactly. More like something was trying to tear me apart from the inside. The containment field. They'd gotten it working. I tried to stand but my legs wouldn't respond. Tried to shift back to human form but the transformation was stuck halfway and my body was caught between states and the pain was getting worse. "Hold the field!" someone shouted. "Don't let it stabilize." Through the haze I saw the hunters moving closer. Saw them raising weapons and preparing to fire, and I knew if I didn't do something in the next few seconds I was going to die here. Then I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A roar that was deeper and older and more terrifying than anything I could produce. A sound that spoke of centuries and power and fury that had been held in check for far too long. Seraphine dropped from the sky like a meteor. She was bigger than me, twice my size at least. Her scales were darker and her wings were scarred and her eyes burned with an amber light that made the hunter's equipment look like children's toys. She landed between me and the hunters and the impact cracked the earth. The containment field flickered and failed and I felt the pressure release and my body started responding again. "Run," she said, and her voice was like thunder. Not speaking to me. Speaking to the hunters. Some of them ran. The ones who didn't raise their weapons and fired and Seraphine moved through the bullets like they were rain. She was faster than something her size should be and more precise, and when she struck it was with controlled violence that left hunters unconscious but alive. She wasn't killing them. Was deliberately pulling her strikes and using the flat of her claws and knocking weapons away instead of tearing through armor. I struggled to my feet and felt my body finally stabilize. The transformation completed and I was fully dragon again and the pain was fading to a dull ache. "Get up," Seraphine said without looking at me. "This is your fight. Not mine. I can't. You can. You're choosing not to. A hunter fired at her and she batted the weapon away with one wing. The hunter stumbled backward and fell and scrambled away on his hands and knees. They came here to kill you, she continued. To eliminate the last dragon and make sure our line ended forever. Are you going to let them? I don't want to kill anyone. Then don't. But you need to fight. She was right and I hated that she was right. Hated that the choice was between fighting and dying and there was no third option that let me walk away clean. I spread my wings and launched myself back into the air. Circled once and tried to assess the situation. The clearing was chaos. Hunters were scattered across the space and some were fighting and some were retreating and some were trying to regroup near their vehicles. The resistance was holding their own but barely. Atticus was pinned down behind an overturned truck. Lysandra was bleeding from a cut on her forehead. Torin's rifle had jammed and he was using it as a club. And Calder was standing near the edge of the clearing with a hunter's rifle in his hands and an expression that was torn between determination and despair. He raised the rifle and for a second I thought he was going to shoot me. Thought this was the moment where he proved everyone right about him being a traitor. Then he turned and fired at a hunter who was aiming at Naira. The hunter went down and Calder was already moving. Was running toward the standing stones where the main group of hunters had set up their command post. Calder, what are you doing? Naira's voice crackled through someone's radio. What I should have done from the beginning, he said. He reached the command post and started pulling equipment offline. Yanking cables and smashing control panels and destroying anything that looked important. The hunters turned on him and he kept working and I saw him take a hit to the ribs that doubled him over. He didn't stop. I dropped from the sky and landed between Calder and the hunters. Spread my wings and let the heat build in my chest and looked at them with every ounce of fury and fear and desperate determination I had. Back off, I said, and my voice came out as a growl that shook the air. The hunters backed off. Calder was on his knees and breathing hard and there was blood on his shirt. He looked up at me and his expression was grateful and agonized and completely exhausted. The main power supply, he gasped, behind the largest stone. If you destroy it, their communications go down. They can't coordinate. Can you walk? Does it matter? Yes. He tried to stand and his legs gave out and I caught him with one wing. Carefully, trying not to cut him with the clawed edges. Get to cover, I said. I'll handle the power supply. Elijah, go. He went. Stumbled toward where Naira was crouched and she grabbed him and pulled him down behind the stone and I heard her swearing at him in a way that sounded almost affectionate. I turned my attention to the power supply. It was a massive generator connected to a web of cables and equipment that hummed with electricity. The kind of setup that probably cost more than most people made in a year. I walked toward it and the hunters opened fire. Bullets pinged off my scales and I felt them like distant pressure points. Annoying but not dangerous. The heat in my chest built and I opened my jaw and let it out. Fire poured from my throat in a stream that was white-hot and concentrated and more powerful than anything I'd produced before. It hit the generator and the metal melted and the equipment exploded in a shower of sparks and molten debris. The clearing went dark except for the moonlight and the fires burning in the wreckage. The hunters' radios went silent. For a moment nobody moved. Everyone was just standing there in the darkness trying to process what had happened. Then someone shouted, "Fall back! Fall back to secondary positions." The hunters started retreating. Not running exactly. More like a controlled withdrawal. They were moving in formation and covering each other and taking their wounded with them. I could have stopped them. Could have cut off their escape routes and forced them to surrender or fight to the death. But I didn't. I watched them go and felt the heat in my chest slowly cooling and my body starting to ache in ways that suggested I was going to be feeling this fight for days. Seraphine landed beside me and folded her wings. She was breathing hard and there was blood on her scales but she looked satisfied. "You let them go," she said. "Yes. Why?" "Because killing them wouldn't change anything. They'd just send more." She was quiet for a moment and when she spoke her voice was softer. "You're learning." "Learning what?" "That being a dragon isn't about power. It's about choosing when to use it and when to hold back." I looked at her and tried to figure out if she was proud or disappointed or something in between. "They'll come back," I said. "Probably. But not tonight, and maybe not for a while. You've given them something to think about." "What's that?" "That dragons aren't the monsters they thought we were." The others were emerging from cover now. Atticus was limping but alive. Lysandra was wrapping a bandage around her head. Torin was checking his rifle and looking shaken. Naira was helping Calder stay upright and he was leaning on her like she was the only thing keeping him conscious. Rowan and Maria appeared from the forest and they both looked exhausted but uninjured. "Everyone okay?" Atticus called out. A chorus of affirmatives came back and I felt something in my chest unclench slightly. We'd survived. All of us. Against odds that should have been impossible. I started to shift back to human form and the transformation was easier this time. Less painful. Like my body was getting used to the change. When I was human again I was naked and freezing and covered in blood that might have been mine or might have been someone else's. Atticus threw me a jacket and I pulled it on and tried not to think about how much everything hurt. That was insane, Torin said, and his voice was shaking. You destroyed their entire setup. Calder helped. Everyone looked at Calder and he looked back with an expression that was defensive and ashamed and hopeful all at once. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For everything. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it. Lysandra walked over to him and for a second I thought she was going to hit him. Instead she just looked at him for a long moment and then nodded once. You helped tonight, she said. That counts for something. Does it? Ask me again tomorrow. Naira's radio crackled and she raised it to her ear. Listened for a moment and then looked at me. The hunters are pulling back to the main road, she said. They're regrouping but they're not advancing. Looks like they're calling it. For now, Seraphine said. She'd shifted back to human form and was standing near the edge of the clearing looking out at the forest. They'll be back. Maybe not the Iron Ring. Maybe someone else. But they'll be back. So what do we do? I asked. She turned to look at me and her expression was complicated. Proud and sad and determined. You keep learning. You keep growing. You figure out what kind of dragon you want to be. I don't want to be a dragon at all. Too late for that. The question now is what kind of dragon you'll become. I looked around at the clearing and at the destruction and at the people who'd fought beside me. At Atticus who'd trusted me from the beginning. At Lysandra who'd been skeptical but had my back anyway. At Torin who was scared but stayed. At Nira who'd kept us connected. At Rowan and Maria who'd provided overwatch. At Calder who'd betrayed us and then tried to make it right. And at Seraphine who'd given me life and sent me away and manipulated everything to give me a chance at survival. I don't know what kind of dragon I want to be, I said finally. Then figure it out. You have time. Do I? More than you think. The hunters will need to regroup, reassess. They've lost equipment and personnel and their containment technology failed. That buys you breathing room. How much? Enough. She walked over to me and put a hand on my shoulder. Her grip was firm and warm and for the first time since she'd arrived I felt like maybe she actually cared about me as a person and not just as the last dragon. You did well tonight, she said quietly. You fought without losing yourself. That's harder than it sounds. It didn't feel hard. It felt necessary. That's because you're starting to understand. Power without purpose is just destruction. But power with purpose can change everything. What's my purpose supposed to be? That's for you to decide. I can't tell you what to do with your life, Elijah. I can only tell you what I've learned from mine. Which is, that being a dragon means being a guardian. Not a weapon, not a monster, a guardian. Someone who protects the balance and keeps the peace and stands between the innocent and those who would harm them. That sounds exhausting. It is, but it's also worth it. She let go of my shoulder and stepped back. Looked around at the group and then back at me. I'm leaving, she said. What? Why? Because this is your journey, not mine. I've done what I came here to do. I've given you the tools and the knowledge and the chance to survive. The rest is up to you. Where will you go? Somewhere quiet. Somewhere I can rest and heal and maybe find some peace. I've been fighting for a long time, Elijah. I'm tired. Will I see you again? Maybe, if you need me, but I hope you won't. She turned and walked toward the edge of the clearing, paused at the tree line and looked back one more time. Make me proud, she said. Then she shifted and launched herself into the sky and disappeared into the darkness. I stood there watching the space where she'd been and tried to process everything that had happened, tried to figure out what I was supposed to do next. So, Atticus said, coming to stand beside me. That was your mom. Yeah, she's intense. That's one word for it. You okay? I thought about it. Thought about the fight and the transformation and the choices I'd made. Thought about the hunters who'd escaped and the ones who'd surrendered and the fact that this wasn't over, would probably never be over. I don't know, I said honestly. Ask me tomorrow. Fair enough. We stood there in silence for a moment and then Lysandra called out that we needed to move before the hunters changed their minds about retreating. The walk back to town was long and cold and painful. My body was starting to register all the damage I'd taken and every step felt like walking on broken glass. But I was alive. We were all alive. And that had to count for something. Ridge Hollow was dark when we got there. Most of the residents had evacuated or were hiding in their homes. The streets were empty except for a few scattered vehicles and the occasional light in a window. We made our way to the church because it was the most defensible position and because nobody had a better idea. The basement was cramped and cold but it was shelter and right now that was enough. Calder collapsed against a wall and Naira started checking him for injuries. Torin was shaking and Rowan was trying to calm him down. Lysandra was cleaning her weapons with methodical precision. Atticus was on the phone with someone trying to figure out what the hunter's next move would be. And Maria was standing in the corner watching me with an expression I couldn't read. You fought well, she said quietly. Thanks. But you held back. I didn't want to kill anyone. I know. That's what makes you different. Different how? Different from what they expected. Different from what they feared. Different from what your mother wanted you to be. What did she want me to be? A weapon. A guardian. A symbol. Something that would restore the dragon line and prove that your kind could still exist in this world. And what do you think I should be? She smiled, and it was sad and knowing and full of secrets. I think you should be whatever you choose to be. The world will try to tell you what you are and what you should do and what your purpose is supposed to be. But in the end, the only person who gets to decide that is you. That's not very helpful. No, but it's true. She walked toward the stairs and paused at the bottom. I'll be around, she said, if you need me, but something tells me you're going to be fine. How do you know? Because you're asking the right questions. And that's always the first step. She left and I was alone in the basement with my thoughts and my aching body and the weight of everything that had happened. I sat down on the floor and leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. Tried to process the fact that I was a dragon. That I'd fought hunters and won. That my mother had left and I was on my own now. That this was just the beginning. Somewhere above me I heard Atticus talking and Naira responding and the sound of people moving around. Normal sounds. Human sounds. Sounds that reminded me that despite everything I'd been through, despite everything I'd become, I was still part of this world. Still connected to these people. Still responsible for what happened next. I opened my eyes and looked at my hands. They were human again, but I could still feel the ghost of claws. Could still feel the power waiting just beneath the surface. I was a dragon. That was a fact I couldn't change. But what kind of dragon I became was still up to me. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all anyone could ask for. The choice to be better than what people expected. The choice to protect instead of destroy. The choice to hold back when it would be easier to let go. I stood up and walked toward the stairs. My body protested, but I ignored it. There was work to do. Plans to make. A future to figure out. The hunters would be back. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not next week. But they'd be back. And when they came, I'd be ready. Not as a weapon. Not as a monster. As a guardian. As someone who'd chosen to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. As a dragon who decided that power without purpose was just destruction, but power with purpose could change everything. I climbed the stairs and emerged into the church and looked around at the people who'd fought beside me. Who'd trusted me. Who'd given me a chance when they had every reason not to. So what now? Torin asked. I looked at him and at the others and tried to find the right words. Now we rebuild, I said. We heal. We prepare. And we figure out what comes next. That's not much of a plan. No. But it's a start. And maybe that was all we needed. A start. A choice. A chance to be something more than what we'd been. Outside the church the sun was starting to rise. The sky was turning pink and gold and the air smelled like smoke and pine and the promise of a new day. I walked to the door and looked out at Greyridge Hollow. At the town that had become my home. At the place where I'd discovered what I was and what I could become. The hunters would be back. There would be more fights. More choices. More moments where I'd have to decide what kind of person I wanted to be. But for now, in this moment, I was alive. We were alive. And that was enough. I closed the door and turned back to the group. To the people who'd become my family. To the future that was waiting for all of us. Let's get some rest, I said. We've earned it. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I actually believed it.